Before we begin, I feel I should say thank you to my friends at Tales from the Heart, who have, in their own little way, given me the inspiration and understanding to discover the truth behind this part of the Bible, and are indirectly responsible for this series as a whole. They are professional storytellers, sharing campfire stories, English folk tales, and legends from Norse and Celtic mythology. They have a fantastic playlist of stories told during lockdown and are due to be back on the streets plying their ancient trade in the near future. Links to both the playlist and their website are in the description, so definitely go check them out. And with that, on with the video.
The story of Noah's Ark and the worldwide flood is possibly the most well-known and yet most critiqued part of the Bible that I happen to know about. A Christian bath time tale with many picture books and parodies written about it, so children know of the great feat of godly power and the faith of man. However, it's quite likely that if you type into YouTube Noah's Ark or the biblical flood, you may find many atheists poking fun at the story, poking holes in it, and many comedians making fun of it to rapt audiences. I definitely know of one clip of Ricky Gervais doing just that. He is using a children's version of it, so I am not offended by it. Because when you look at it in a plain fact-by-fact statement, it seems very unlikely to be anything other than fable, and there's material aplenty there for a comedian who's not afraid to speak his mind. He does say, it's no trouble offending people, it's too easy. The thing is though, when I first looked at the biblical story of the Bible, having only read the picture books and the children's versions, I didn't see a fun kid's story. I saw something that has been made fun of due to a lack of understanding and exposure to the right stimuli. Now there are lots and lots of questions to cover, and I somehow doubt I'll be able to cover all of them, but I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can regarding the story. So let's dive in. The original biblical story of the flood is told in a way that I haven't seen any of the children's books over the years. It has broader strokes on the main body of the tale, and yet has some interesting little details that almost seem like footnotes, annotations, or just personal tidbits. When I read this through, my mind wasn't just full of images of great boats, many animals, never-ending rain, and vast stretches of water. I also had an image of a tall man in a long cloak, possibly holding a staff, striding back and forth around a campfire in a great roundhouse before a rapt audience, listening to tales of old. None of these images are in the text, and couldn't come from the text, but I had experience of just such an event. several times actually, mostly due to my friends who make a living out of telling legends of the old days to children, not only in school gatherings, but also out and about on the streets of Hertfordshire. Strange as it may seem, the biblical story of the flood in the Old Testament has all the hallmarks of the oral traditions. I did a course in storytelling, led by an incredible storyteller, who told us the bones of the story are the main things we need to focus on, and that is what will happen in every storytelling tradition. The rest, the details, they can be added, they can be narrowed down, they can be streamlined, and they can be bulked out. And that's the thing. Most of those details are things that can be added. The idea of how deep the water was going above the mountains, that is an added detail. 40 Days and 40 Nights, that has a storyteller's ring to it, and 2 of every animal, male and female, according to their kind. That is a very storytelling sounding description. Worse than I've said, but it makes more sense than anything else. Since storytelling is essentially a long drawn out game of Chinese whispers, exact numbers like ages and dates that can range into the 3 figures are much harder to remember. So little tidbits like this are far easier to add thanks to a storyteller's caprice and wish to sweeten the narrative with something a bit more wholesome. Tempting though it is to go all the way back to the beginning, I've already done that in previous videos, and the story of Noah itself doesn't start on the 6th chapter of Genesis, so we'll start there. It tells of how mankind multiplied, and how the daughters of man were seen as attractive by the sons of God. These are most likely angels or heavenly beings of some sort. Now, this also emphasizes that whilst the patriarchs, such as Seth, Mahalalel, Kenan, and Enosh, are all mentioned almost exclusively, there's bound to have been hundreds of others who are not mentioned. Therefore, they would have daughters, and they would have been attractive to some people, including the sons of God. This resulted in them mating with the children of man, hence leading to the rise of legendary beings such as giants, demigods, and heroes. This may explain why in other stories such as the Norse mythologies, Greek mythologies, and even Far Eastern mythologies, there are stories of gods mating with humans and producing demigods of incredible power. If anyone reads those stories, they know that this results in people being evil just for the sake of being evil, or fighting against the gods and hence bringing ruin to the earth. This union clearly doesn't sit well with God, because he saw that wickedness being caused, and he foresaw that it wouldn't end well for Earth, or for that matter, mankind. This is part of the biblical narrative, so he decided to wash the earth clean through a great flood to wipe out all wicked men and the creatures of the earth and sky. That's a bit harsh, but considering how often I've discussed with friends the merits of a reset button on humanity, it isn't too dissimilar. We often discuss the merits of just having a nuclear holocaust and just letting mankind start all over again. Hopefully we'll get it right this time. Noah is the 10th named patriarch of Adam's line, and alone amongst the people of the earth at that time is righteous and openly walks with God. In this case, open to God's word. This was most fortunate for his family because God spoke to him about what he was going to do, corruption on earth, and how he was going to destroy them. This is when he commanded Noah to build the great ark and bring the animals to the ark so they can survive the flood. The details about the size, materials, and building methods of the ark are remarkable. I saw the references to cypress wood being lined with pitch and being just such a length, height, and breadth. Now, I've done my research, and cypress wood would have been available in the region at the time, and was perfectly usable to make boats. Has been well noted for that, actually. Along with pitch as well, which is technically type of sap or even tar, is well known for keeping boats sealed as well. In fact, many things are waterproof with tar and pitch these days, so it's certainly possible those materials were being used. It's also possible that the storyteller, being asked about it, knew quite a lot about boats, and so would have gone into incredible detail about how it was made and the materials used. We do this a lot in storytelling today, using information that we happen to know and applying it to what we say. For example, is in the Legends of Robin Hood, mentioning venison. It was well known at the time, but if you happen to know that was deer meat, fantastic. You mentioned that in the story. Strangely enough, a cuneiform tablet in the British Museum told of a similar vessel being made in a native Babylonian style, a kufa, I think it's called, which is a rounded craft similar to a coracle and waterproofed with bitumen, which is another type of tar. If this was the case, and the storyteller in question was Egyptian, they may have thought, hang on, this big round craft wouldn't be safe or plausible to steer on the open sea. It's a river craft, which is true. And so they would have rejigged the story to account for what he knew. Would have been taller, would have been longer, would have been thinner. Therefore, it makes sense. And it is within the realm of narrative malleability. It's not too far off to add information that you happen to know is correct, or at least is more plausible to a wider audience. Some stories in Celtic mythology tell of how the sun is the source of all wisdom, whereas others have it as a man beneath the mountain. Other versions could have it as a dragon. There are just so many possibilities. So which one is it in this case? Is it the massive coracle, or is it the long thin arc? Personally, I have no idea. But I will say this. Some geologists believe they may have found the original Ark on the mountains of Ararat, and it matches the biblical measurements more than the Mesopotamian tablets. So I'm going to leave that out there. I'll see if I can leave a link to it in the description. Go check it out. It is quite interesting. The Animals Going In 2 by 2 is a well-known song, and I'm pretty sure all of us have got it stuck in our heads right now. I certainly do. But I had to get past that because two things ironically get brought up about the animals. One of which is how they got all of them on the Ark. Taking the measurement of the Ark, atheists would say it was impossible to fit all the animals on the Ark. Going by their arguments, there are 20,000 different land animal species on the planet and 10,500 bird species at this current time, even allowing for diversification of species since the flood. There's no way they could fit all the animals onto the Ark. It's just not possible. This is something even dedicated environmentalist naturalists, such as David Attenborough, had to consider when he, during a TV series, where he was planning on, say if he was going to build an Ark, which animals would he pick? He had to limit his choices, which made for a fascinating TV show, and I wish you'd seen it. I really do need to look it up. But I think this is taking the every animal part of the text far too literally. Let's look at some facts. The Ark was most likely built in Mesopotamia or the Mediterranean basin. And if the world was filled with such wicked men, it would be impossible for a pair of every type of animal to get to the Ark, full stop, without being hunted on the way, or having sea blocking their way. Granted, God has made land bridges before, but it's very unlikely he's going to make all of them in time for all the animals. Nor do I think he needs to, as at the time the people would have thought that the animals in the area around them were the only animals on Earth. Even in the time of Moses, this would be a time where they mostly focus around the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, and possibly parts of Asia Minor and Europe. This will mean that the animals they would think were all would include lions, giraffes, camels, elephants, possibly leopards, armadillos, aardvarks. So many animals, quite a broad range of them, are a classic menagerie of animals, if you will. There are a few exceptions. For example, it's very unlikely them had great bears. It's certainly unlikely they would have had elk, and sadly, for Australians out there, kangaroos wouldn't have been on the Ark. There's just no way we would have got from Australia. They would have been local animals. And here's another thing that gets mentioned by naysayers. Two animals, male and female, each according to their kind, can't reproduce a whole species. It's just not possible. That is true. You do need a minimum number of animals to preserve the diversity. And that is tricky to find with just two. You need at least 6 breeding pairs. No wonder conservation is such a challenging job. But what sounds more catchy in a story. Two of each, male and female, according to their kind, or enough animals to continue the species. They don't need to say enough animals to continue the species if they can say two according to each of their kind, and so on. It's going to point out they need enough just to keep the population going when the flood goes down. It may take a while, but that's a detail that can be a bit too literal, but in this case just needs to be allowed some room. No, isn't that convincing, but that's storytelling for you. It's not going to be entirely factual, it's meant to be entertaining as well. Since nearly every culture on Earth has a legend of a great flood that covered the Earth and inspired great migrations inland to higher places, the memory of a flood is well known, even allowing for cultural influences. Popular culture will nearly always point towards Atlantis as the classic sunken city, sunken civilization before the rest of history. Makes perfect sense. Another thing is that paleontologists, geologists, and paleoclimatologists have found evidence that not only was there a vast flood, which could be rising sea levels or just a breaking of the Strait of Gibraltar in the Mesopotamian and Mediterranean region, but also an extensive period of rainfall that lasted for thousands of years. What's even more interesting is both of these events happened within the timeline of early man. Not at the same time, but seeing as excessive rainfall and floods are connected, it doesn't take a huge leap to combine the two tales into one and make the story we know today. So in short, the flood certainly happened. Doesn't necessarily mean that it happened exactly the way it was told in the Bible. Every culture has a bit of the truth. Each culture has their own version, each culture has their own area to cover. So when you link them together, you'll see how similar it can actually be. All tales nearly always have a moral to make the telling more worthwhile. But this can change from teller to teller, as with the details, to push home their own meaning. It could be a sign that God can take and give in equal portions, that he sees evil wherever evil tries to hide, that early man was broken and needed cleaning, and that obeying God, even if it seems completely pointless and unnecessary, can keep one safe from great disasters and help them flourish in the future. One could put all manner of morals on this tale, shape the telling around it, and still get a broadly similar narrative. However, I would personally point out one thing that I feel proves this happens. It's a little known story, well known part of it anyway, that happens after the flood goes down. Because that wasn't the end of Noah's story, no. Noah planted a vineyard, got blind drunk, and passed out naked in his tent. This shows that he wasn't some mythical construct of storytelling or some moral standard by which we should all be held, though we can never achieve it. This shows he was human, with human flaws, human weaknesses, and so was not perfect. God certainly did call him perfect, but when you're looking at someone that walks with God in the time of people that turned their back on him for years and were acting in all manner of wicked ways, it's not hard to see why. Focusing on one person who is doing good amongst evil can certainly make them seem perfect. Not truly. He had his flaws. He was the best man for the job. That's the moral altar of the story. Humans aren't perfect. But God doesn't expect that of us. He never had that in mind. But he knows when we're good enough to do the job. And he will let us know. So to sum up, this story may seem completely fanciful, but it has so many kernels of truth, all balanced out in the web of a story, that there is little reason to suspect it didn't. Noah certainly existed. A flood happened. The rest is another tale.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching and God bless.